Super excited to have you guys here this afternoon. Welcome to Navigating the Future. So this is using WordPress with WordPress menu blocks that work for everybody. I'm super excited to be presenting today. My name is Jennifer Dust. I am the Director of Engineering here at Aten. My background is primarily based in higher education, working with non-for-profit organizations, and I've had the privilege to contribute with the open source community for well over 15 years, working in both Drupal and WordPress. And the benefit is I'm also a disabled human, so I'm really excited to be presenting on accessibility today.
My name is Ellie Frigoli. I am a technical lead here at Aten Design Group. I've been doing WordPress development for around a decade now, and I deeply enjoy leveraging WordPress to build impactful, dynamic user experiences that are truly accessible to everyone. We're so glad you're joining us today, and let's dive in.
All right, so we're going to get started. Super excited. So, how to test your website. I think it's really important to know how you're going to actually test, especially when it comes to accessibility. If you don't know how to find the issues, we can't figure out how to actually fix them. So, when we talk about automated testing, we're going to talk about the tools that comb through the code specifically. These are going to be things that might be difficult for you to find manually in code or things that can't be seen by just looking at the front end of your website. So problems like color contrast, incorrect heading structure on the page itself, maybe vague links or missing form labels, images without alternative text, and you kind of get the picture here. So there are things that you would really only find typically with looking at the code itself. So I do want to call out that there are some results that you can get within automated testing that can give false errors. And that is because at the end of the day, it is just a piece of software that is following specific expectations. So while automated testing is a really good place to start, I want to call out that human logic is always going to need to be applied when we're figuring out and reading these reports. False errors that we frequently see can be result of fake color contrast. It's not reading something correctly. You've got elements that the software thinks might be headings, but maybe they aren't headings. And this is one of the reasons why having automated tests reports being read manually, it's really important. So I can't stress that enough. Automated testing, it's not a catch-all. And manual testing is always at the end of the day going to be necessary, but this is the first step, and this is actually what we're going to kind of dive into as a starting point for today. The two most common types of automated testing that we've employed is WAVE, which is the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, and Axe Dev Tools. So Axe DevTools, I want to call out, it's a more developer-friendly toolkit that can be integrated into your dev workflow. I've got the URL here at the top of the page. So at dayq.com/axe, A-X-E. Some of the tools that they include are code linters that allow you to specifically find issues in your CLI, as well as browser extensions for automated page testings. It's a great place if you're already kind of past the initial you want a deeper look into what you're seeing inside pages, it's a great place to start. For the sake of this presentation, though, we're going to focus on a little bit more of a beginner-friendly. We're going to look at Wave's automated capabilities. However, if you are a dev seeking to integrate automated testing into your workflow, I would really recommend looking at Axe DevTools. Okay. So if you're new to automated testing, this is Wave. It has a website I've added at the top of this slide is wave.webaim.org. They've got their website as well as a Chrome and or Firefox extension. The extension is really great for sites that might be behind a login. Maybe you have specific requirements that looks different for admin users versus content editors. So very useful in that element. It's a fairly clean overview of what kind of errors and warnings are typically found in code. And it's a really great tool for people who are going to start out. Wave's website in general is a good resource for learning the WCAG standards, along with the basics of some of the ADA compliance and requirements. And they provide some detailed information related to those errors that's a little bit more human readable than what you might see in other sites or other software. We're going to walk through, I've got an example here up on the screen. This is the ESPN website that we've analyzed through Wave. And we're going to walk through interpreting some of these results and what we're seeing here on the page. On the left-hand sidebar, Wave is displaying a summary of the site and an accessibility impact score. So you're going to see that that's the AIM score, 2.3 out of 10. And I think there's enough spots on this page to kind of figure out, okay, yeah, you can see what's going on. And it provides a quick measurement of the impact on users with disabilities. So it's not a perfect grading scale. If you're at 10 on Wave, that doesn't mean your site's perfectly accessible. It just means that the automated test did not find any blatant issues within the page. So when the page within the content on the right, you can kind of see the presence of these accessibility errors. There are the little icons and tokens all over the page. There's a lot happening here. And Wave provides a toggle in the toolbar to disable those styles. So that is in the upper left-hand corner. You'll see styles on and off. And we're just going to go ahead and turn that off for our example here. So sometimes it's easier to interpret the results with the styling disabled. It's a lot similar to where we see things like headings and errors appear, the red icons stand out more clearly against the plain text, and you can see things that were hidden that you wouldn't necessarily have been able to see with those styles on. So it gives us a better idea of how a screen reader might experience this site, focusing on a semantic structure and flow rather than on how pretty or visual something might be. We've got here in the detail section, I've scrolled down a little bit in that left-hand sidebar. They have a summary section above and details below that allow us to kind of zero in on some of the errors and features within this code. Clicking on any of those icons on the left-hand toolbar pane will actually jump or scroll in the page to wherever the location of that element it can find and outline it for clarity. If you do not have styles off, sometimes you'll click on a error here and it will jump somewhere in the page, but it won't actually show you. And that just means that that error is currently hidden because of styling. So that's where the benefit of turning those styles off will show you certain things that maybe you didn't see previously. Whenever possible, it will also include an explanation. So what's going on with the error and a brief example as to how you might want to resolve it. We've kind of got on the left-hand side here, I've got a green box around pointing where I've clicked on one of these and it's got that dashed outline and a pop-up where it's saying, okay, this is a low contrast issue. It's this very light gray against a white background. If we click on the reference link in an element, the icon will actually show us a deeper dive into what's going on for those standards and solutions. So we're going to actually move into that contrast error that we saw though. With that dedicated contrast checking, it's going to check against the foreground and the background of elements, providing a ratio score. That's where you're seeing 2.43 against 1. And if it's passing either the AA or AAA standards in those specific thresholds. In our example here, our test actually passes neither. So you can see in the left-hand side where it says text size normal, sample, WCAG AA, fail, AAA, fail. The difference between those standards typically is AAA is more strict than AA. AA is the recommended baseline whenever possible. It is going to also provide us a tool that will allow you to drag around the different contrast. You typically can't change the background color when you're working on maybe a web page and you can only edit the visual like text color. So that's where you'll use the foreground and you're going to end up dragging that around until you get to an acceptable threshold based on what you're trying to show on the page. The other two tools that I want to touch on are the structure tab. So this is all the way in. We've got the code viewer itself as well. The structure tab is going to show us obviously the structure of the page based on headings and other semantic elements. So that's this blue outline on the left-hand side here. So it's going to be helpful to find if you've got multiple H1s on the page. So you should never have more than one H1 on the page. That's typically your page title. Or maybe you've got some incorrectly configured navigation elements. Maybe you've got headers jumping around on sizes. That's where you're going to be able to visually see that in the structure tab. The code viewer is at the bottom of the page. They've got this kind of teal looking icon that you can click open and it's expandable and it will show you the raw HTML that is used to actually generate this page. It's very similar to the function if you've ever used browser developer tools, providing visibility into the code itself. So you can click on the errors in the toolbar pane and it will scroll to that visually in the page, but it'll also highlight, I've got it highlighted here. We've clicked on an H2 for the logo and it's got that kind of grayish box outline around it. There are a lot of tools included in Wave. I really recommend if you get an opportunity to run some tests on your own site and play around with the toolkit to kind of get a feel for the power of this automated testing. Now that we've kind of covered briefly what automated testing looks like, let's actually talk about manual testing. So this is where there are some users who are going to interact with your website only using a keyboard to navigate. There are maybe people who aren't able to use a mouse or able-bodied users who just find it easier to use keyboard commands. Because of that, anybody can test a website using just their keyboard. So the good thing is, if your keyboard can interact with something on a website, then a screen reader or other assistive tech users should be able to do the same thing as well. If you can't interact with something using a keyboard on your website, then that means a screen reader can't either, which is why we want to make sure that if at the bare minimum the site works with a keyboard, that's kind of our first major step. I do want to call out that there is a note. Some certain browsers do require you to turn on interacting with a keyboard. So if you can't get your browser into your browser using a keyboard, it can be found in your browser preferences. We've seen this historically on Safari. I think Apple has released a couple of changes since then, so hopefully this isn't a problem anymore, but it has been. And so if you're running into that and you're testing on Safari, go check your preferences to see if you can use keyboard. Okay, how do we navigate with the keyboard? I've highlighted on this screen right now, we're looking at a keyboard. I've got primary keys that we're going to use for testing. And these are going to include your tab and shift, escape, spacebar, and the arrow keys. Keep in mind that keyboard users only will ever tab to interactive elements within a tab flow. So what I mean by interactive is you've got a slideshow, a link, something that can be clicked on or interacted in that sense within the order of the page. Ideally, you're never going to be tabbing to headings or paragraphs unless there's, links or content in there for those users to interact with. Starting with the most common, right? We've got tabs. So this is the key that you're going to use to move forward through the site within the thing that's called the tab flow. And that's the order in which the keyboard will be able to interact with content on your site. If you want to go backwards, so maybe you tabbed too many times forward, that's where you're going to get that shift tab combination that will allow you to navigate backwards. We've got escape. So escape is kind of unique. It should always close drop downs, any kind of pop-up, video, modal, so those kind of alerts, as well as mobile menus should be able to be closed with the escape tab. Arrow keys. So the arrow keys are used a lot within forms, such as moving between radio buttons, checkboxes, as well as moving between carousels, galleries, select drop downs, and in more recent years, navigating through menus. If you're interacting with something and you're trying out the tab key and you can't seem to get it to do what you'd expect it to do, try using the arrow keys instead. If the arrow keys don't work and the tab doesn't work, that tells you you've got a bigger problem. But sometimes it'll expect arrows over tabs. It should be pretty frequent, not that much of an issue. But so we've got space and enter. These are going to be buttons on your page and links. So this is kind of any kind of interactable button, link, checkbox. This is what would you'd press enter or space to engage with those or make it an active state. So clicking on a checkbox would make it checked or unchecked. Now that you've got a pretty high level of how each button is expected to interact, let's take a look at a checklist that you can use for when you're testing your site. So hopefully this is helpful. Can you interact with your site? This is, for example, you've reached a menu or a specific element within your page. Can a user engage with it or interact with it via the keyboard at all? Check your focus styles. So that's that blue, sometimes stylized outline that you see around content. Does it display around each focused element? Have you tabbed to something and it just disappears and you don't really know where you are in the page? That's a problem. You want to be able to see that outline. Is the interaction expected? So, for example, does the slideshow move when you tab or arrow through it like you would expect rather than all of a sudden jumping to the end or jumping 3 slides forward? Does it move one at a time, etc.? Does your site have modals or pop-ups or carousels? Alerts is another one. Can those be accessed? And can they navigate within them if there's content in them? Can they close them? So that's a big one. Can they close or get to that content? Navigating forwards and backwards, can you navigate through your site if a user tabs into, say you've got an article and they go, oh, I missed some really good content, I want to go back and find something. Can they shift tab and get there? Or can they not? Here I've got a video example of a user actually tabbing through the header on our homepage. In the short clip here, you can see that there's that blue outlined focus state that goes around the logo and each menu item, including search. That's important here. When you use stylized focus to match your style, brand, or design, ideally, if possible, we don't want to change these focus states and leave it as the default because a lot of the times assistive tech users have software that allow them to customize what these interactions look like for them. So I know it's tempting, but try to leave them as the default when possible. Continuing with our list that I gave you earlier, so we've got a few more here. The hover is not the only way to display information. This is a really big one. Hovering over content should not be the only way that users can actually access it. There needs to be a way for the keyboard users to get into that content because if they're not using a mouse, then it's not going to work for them. And it needs to be able to be opened and closed. It's also important to check your mobile menu. So I know it seems kind of challenging, but can a keyboard user interact with each item, including opening and closing nested menus, along with the menu itself on a mobile device? So you can do this like if you squish your browser on your desktop and kind of make it small enough that your site will switch to its mobile format. That's when you'd be able to test that with a keyboard. Websites should also have visually hidden skip links at the top of the page for navigation and main content. Do these exist on your site? The way you can find out is if you go to your site, fresh page load, and you hit tab as the very first thing. Does this small visually hidden skip link show up visually on the page, allowing you to move to later content within the page itself? Sometimes these don't exist at all on certain sites. It's really frustrating because then users have to go through the whole menu or other content to just get farther in the page. So that's a really quick one to test for sure. And then when tabbing through your page content, does the flow of the page when you're moving through it actually follow a logical order? I've got a good rule of thumb with this. If you can interact with your mouse, you must be able to interact with your keyboard. I've got a video. This is another example here that's showing that skip link that I was just talking about at the top of the page. So it shows up briefly where it says skip to main content. They're able to click it and skip over our header navigation entirely into the main body content. We often see things like links when we're reviewing sites, but make sure we don't want to run into this issue. And skip links are generally used to skip that main content or highly interactive content. So that's videos, maps, social media embeds, all of which typically have a lot of things that a keyboard user would have to get through in order to get to the next piece of content. You can also see this is that flow I'm talking about. When a user comes in, they're going down the page in an order to those interactive elements that would make sense to a user. Okay, so we've talked about automated testing and keyboard testing. Now we want to review your site manually. This is where you're going to confirm false errors that might have been called in the automated testing and then check any structural issues that might have surfaced in the other portions of your review. We want to apply human logic and flag anything that doesn't seem or feel right. Color specifically should not be the only means of communicating important information to a visual user. Those who are colorblind, like myself, need to have other ways to distinguish information this goes for non-visual users as well. So if you imagine, right, your site's being printed in black and white on a piece of paper, can users still understand what's being displayed? If not, then you probably need text or patterns to be implemented along with color. I've got three examples at the bottom of this slide. We've got three different pie charts. The left relies on solely on color to differentiate, and the middle and the right have had their color saturation removed, right? As if we're printing in black and white, to just show the difficulty of using only color to differentiate between those sections. By adding a pattern in the far right of the chart, we're able to actually use that instead of color to read each section. And it shows up pretty nicely, especially if somebody doesn't have the ability to see it or you're printing out documents. It's a great way to differentiate rather than just using color. We also want to review the target area if someone is expecting to interact with is large enough. So, with the release of WCAG 2.2, the requirement has changed so that the minimum AA standard is 24 by 24 pixels. So, I would like to recommend a minimum standard using the triple AA requirement of 44 by 44 is your minimum size. Basically, what this means is that it's big enough for someone to click on the element itself. I've got kind of two examples here where it's really close and tight to the icons or the elements themselves versus having a little bit more space, being a little more forgiving when someone's trying to click on it. The reason we want them between these dimensions, especially like checkboxes or form elements in social, is that it's easier for people to find and interact with them. And it definitely makes a big difference when you're interacting on a mobile device. I don't know about anybody, but I've clicked on one too many things on a mobile device where it's the wrong thing and it was just too small for me to click on what I actually wanted. Okay, so we've got the last couple of things here for manually reviewing the page. Is your alt text meaningful or relevant? Reviewing content and imagery within a site, is it actually going to be useful? All of the information that is provided in those alt texts when we write them goes to screen readers, which means you want to keep it short and to the point. The alt text itself should convey the content and function of the image within the context of your content. So that's really important. If you've got images or icons that do not provide additional information or are just visual enhancements, they should have ARIA hidden as true. Another good example would be, let's say you're describing a room for your bed and breakfast. You've got those images, you want to describe the room images versus having stylized icons that don't necessarily, like they look lovely, but they don't necessarily add to the meaning of the content if a user was trying to navigate through the page. We want to avoid using redundant language such as image of or logo of or those kinds of things. And then lastly, you never use SEO keywords with an alt text. So if you're just trying to, trigger out the SEO stuff, you don't want to do that. It's really bad practice and can actually have a negative impact on your Google ranking. So just a heads up there. Okay, I've talked a whole bunch. I'm going to actually hand this over to Ellie now so they can dive into the WordPress menu options.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jennifer. So now we've had that background information about how to test websites for accessibility. Let's take a look at WordPress menus to see how the different menu solutions measure up to accessible standards. When it comes to building WordPress menus, there's a few common tools that most sites rely on for their menu structure. Let's take a look at two of the most common options and evaluate their strengths and their shortcomings. In modern WordPress sites compatible with block themes, WordPress core provides two blocks used to build navigation menus, the page list and the submenu blocks. Both of these blocks together facilitate the creation of submenu drop-down items within the site navigation. However, there are drawbacks to leveraging these core blocks. The capabilities of navigation menus built through these blocks are limited to bare bones functionality. It prevents significant challenges when navigating with a keyboard. First, the menu can only be navigated through the Tab key, with no arrow key functionality present. Fully accessible menus should allow users to navigate using both the Tab keys or the arrow keys, with the left and right arrows navigating to top-level sibling items and the up and down arrows to navigate through submenus. The tab flow is also inconsistent with these core blocks. The tab flow is not in alignment with the visual order of menu items on the page. Once menu items are expanded, it's not visually clear which direction the tab flow is moving through the submenus. Finally, all menus will collapse when the escape key is pressed. This can be a frustrating experience for users navigating with a keyboard, as it not only closes all open submenus, but it also does not return the focus back to the parent item. Ideally, the escape key should only close the currently active submenu and return the focus back to the parent menu item. This makes the user's current position in the page's tab order clear. In this screencast, I've built a basic menu using the page list block and the WordPress 2024 theme. This is built with no customization or manual styling. I'm able to tab between links, but as you can see, when I try to navigate into the submenu using up and down arrows, it instead shifts the entire page up and down. Once the second level of the mega menu is expanded, the tab order becomes visually confusing and difficult to interpret. While navigating within the second level of the menu, I press the Escape key, and instead of returning focus to the first level submenu parent item, the entire menu collapses and the visual focus is lost entirely. Since WordPress core menu blocks provide only bare-bones megamenu functionality, many third-party plugins exist to give users an easier interface for building megamenus on their site. However, these plugins run many risks when it comes to accessibility. First, the code may not be vetted or tested for accessibility at all. This is especially true of plugins that receive little support or maintenance. This is why the automated and manual testing steps that Jennifer outlined are crucial for sites that leverage third-party megamenu plugins. Even plugin solutions that claim to be accessible may not actually be accessible. Their level of WCAG compliance is up to the plugin author's discretion. This means that even widely used, well-supported, and supposedly accessible menu plugins will still need to be thoroughly tested with both automated and manual tools. In our experience, even the most compliant third-party plugins still require manual code modifications through the use of JavaScript in order to be fully accessible. Not only do these modifications require familiarity with coding, but they may also run the risk of breaking if the plugin's core functionality ever changes, which means that even more time will need to be spent thoroughly testing the menu after every plugin update. In this screencast, I'm navigating a menu built with a highly rated plugin currently in use by over 500,000 WordPress sites. However, it still falls into several common pitfalls of inaccessible menu structure. The navigation element generated by the plugin does not have a label, which leads to confusion since there are two separate menu elements in use on the page. I attempt to navigate using arrow keys, but up and down arrows move the entire page. Left and right arrows do nothing on top-level items, and when in a submenu, they close that submenu and do not return visual focus to the previous or next top-level item. Pressing Escape while on a top-level item with an open menu does nothing, and Escape while inside a submenu closes all menus with no visual focus returned to parent items. This makes keyboard navigating the menu a confusing, inconsistent, and honestly frustrating experience. In this next screencast, I am navigating the same menu after nearly 300 lines of custom code have been added in our child theme to modify the menu's behavior. The navigation elements are properly labeled for screen readers to provide context to users. The mobile menu navigation span has been converted to an actual button element for improved HTML structure. The Escape key now closes only the currently open submenu, and the top-level items are navigable through left and right arrow keys, and up and down arrow keys navigate the submenus. After these considerable modifications, this menu finally functions in a more accessible way. So you might be thinking, if the core blocks aren't fully accessible, but neither are third-party plugins, what do I do? Well, it's a little more complex than one right or wrong option. Not every third-party solution is built the same, and some may have higher levels of accessibility than others out of the box. So if you're looking to implement a mega menu plugin, or if you already have a plugin and you're not sure what level of compliance you're at, here are some practical steps for evaluating plugin solutions. The official documentation is the best place to start. A well-documented plugin or theme may include a special section of documentation around their accessibility standards and how to use their tools in a way that is accessible. The level of detail and documentation can vary wildly based on the developers who built it. So not every plugin is going to have a dedicated documentation library. The next best place to search is going to be the README file. Most plugins include at least a README file located in their root file directory with details about the plugin's functionality and how to utilize it. Look for mentions of accessibility or compliance with WCAG AA or AAA standards. If it's still unclear whether the plugin is built to be accessible, check the change logs for any mention of accessibility features, such as adding ARIA or improving keyboard navigation. This indicates that the plugin authors are keeping accessibility in mind as they continue to iterate and improve their products. If the changelogs and release notes are also lacking, the next best place to look will be the support forums. Users will frequently reach out to developers via support forums to request features or highlight roadblocks to accessibility. The support threads will provide a starting place for locating the pain points in a product and also give a clearer perspective of the plugin's level of compliance. It also provides the opportunity to assess the development team's response to feedback regarding their accessibility standards in their products. Finally, rely on the community that's around you. Reach out to ask questions to not only the plugin's developers, but to other developers who are using the plugin. Chances are, if you're struggling to understand their accessibility standards, there are other developers in the WordPress community that are struggling as well. Through thoughtful feedback and productive conversations around accessibility, we can collectively elevate the standards of the WordPress open source community as a whole. Next, inspect the code. Open the plugin files and look through the output code for semantic HTML elements, such as a nav element to wrap the navigation, and button elements used to toggle mobile menus and submenus. These elements help users utilizing assistive technology to understand and navigate the menu to reach the information that they need. Look for proper usage of ARIA on elements such as buttons, which should denote through an ARIA expanded attribute whether their submenus are currently open. This helps communicate more information to assistive technology to help users access nested levels of submenus. A key principle to keep in mind is that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. It is important to evaluate the code not just for the presence of ARIA, but for the proper application of it. Finally, ensure that roles and labels are in place for screen readers. The structure of truly accessible code should rely first on appropriate semantic HTML elements, such as nav elements and button elements. Then, it should rely on ARIA attributes being applied for context and assistance to screen readers. And finally, roles for any elements such as a tooltip or standalone icons for which no semantic HTML tags currently exist. The final and most important step is to thoroughly test the functionality. Install the plugin on a sandbox or development site and perform both automated and manual testing using the tools and steps we've outlined in the first half of this webinar. This will give you a good idea of whether the plugin is truly accessible or what steps you may need to take to modify the front-end code to become accessible. Okay, so you've evaluated your third-party plugin, you've found some areas that could use some accessibility improvements, or maybe you've realized that you want full control over the menu structure to ensure that it's accessible from the ground up. So let's walk through some common solutions we've frequently implemented to improve WordPress menu accessibility. To build an accessible menu structure on the back end, our recommended solution is the creation of a custom nav walker class. Custom nav walkers are custom code based on WordPress core's nav walker class that customize the output HTML structure of a WordPress menu object. Custom nav walker classes are the best method for controlling navigation structure in WordPress because they rely on core functionality, they adhere to best practices and code standards, and they provide an accessible semantic structure from the ground up. Custom nav walkers can be placed in standalone plugins to generate custom menu blocks that can then be added to a template through the site editor, which is our preferred approach when we're building block-based WordPress sites. Now, just a quick heads up, we're about to show some pretty technical code examples. I'll explain what we're looking at a high level, explain what the code is doing in each example, and I'll help walk us through what types of customizations can be done with custom code to improve accessibility. So this may look very scary, especially if you're not used to seeing a NavWalker class. But let's walk through what changes we can achieve through PHP code on the back end to build a menu structure that utilizes accessible HTML patterns. What our custom NavWalker does is it takes a WordPress menu object, the native menus that can be built inside of WordPress admin, and it walks through each item in the menu. As our code steps through the menu items one by one, we have the opportunity to adjust the HTML code output based on each menu item's features, such as whether the menu item has a nested submenu, or if the menu item is a link to the currently active page. In this example, we begin our output of each menu item by opening an HTML semantic list item. We then check to see whether the item has a nested submenu by checking for a default WordPress class called menu item has children. If the item does not have a submenu and it's only a top-level link, we would output that item as a link element with the URL set to the item's native URL. It's also important to check if the link is set to the current page by checking the menu items classes to see if the current menu item class is present. If it is, we also add a special aria current equals page attribute. This indicates to assistive technology that this is a link to the currently active page. If the item does have a child submenu, we output the top level item as a button element with an aria has pop-up value of true and an aria expanded value of false. This alerts screen readers that this button will toggle a drop-down menu when interacted with, but that menu is collapsed by default. We then close our semantic HTML tag for the element, whether it was a link or a button. This gives our menu an accessible HTML structure from the ground up, and we are able to control class names for easier styling and for JavaScript handling on the front end. If you're using a third-party plugin, it's highly unlikely that you will have access to the HTML structure. Here are some common modifications we recommend implementing through JavaScript. The first is to ensure that all buttons are using semantic HTML. Frequently, we come across plugins that use span elements instead of buttons for mobile menu toggles and for top-level navigation items without submenus. Converting these elements to buttons provides more context for assistive technology, as well as allowing us to implement appropriate ARIA attributes. This next code snippet is an example of a custom convert element function built in jQuery. This function takes an existing HTML element, stores all of its attributes and data, then replaces it with a different type of HTML element with the stored attributes and data reapplied. This is something we do frequently when modifying existing plugins to convert span tags that act like buttons into true HTML button elements to improve the button context for assistive technology. A more advanced modification that can be done through JavaScript is to implement arrow key functionality. This enhances keyboard navigation by allowing users to use the left and right arrows for moving horizontally between top-level menu items, and using the up and down arrows to navigate through submenu items. Now, this next modification is a bit too extensive to dive into in this webinar, but let's walk through just a pseudocode implementation at a very high level to explain the keyboard patterns that we want to implement. In this code example, we begin by listening for the user to press a keyboard key while the menu is in focus. If the key pressed is one of the arrow keys, we want to prevent the standard behavior so that we can modify the functionality of the key. If the user presses the right arrow key, we want to move focus to the next top-level sibling item in the megamenu navigation list. We check to see if the current item is a top-level button with an open submenu. If it is, we want to close its associated submenu first. We then check to find the next item in the top-level menu list, and we move the focus to that item. If the currently focused element is the last top-level item in the menu, we loop the focus back to the start of the menu. We would then repeat a very similar modification process for the up, down, and left arrow keys to implement each key's desired behavior. The final modification that we frequently make to existing plugin behavior is preventing the escape key from collapsing all menus simultaneously. Instead, we reprogram the escape key to close only the currently open submenu and return focus back to the parent button. Now, this is another modification that's a bit too complex to fully show, but let's walk through a basic example to give an overview of the steps required to modify escape key behavior, to close the current menu or submenu and return that focus to the parent button. In this code example, we once again begin by listening for the user to press a keyboard key while the menu is in focus. If the escape key is pressed, we'll need to determine which target button is the parent of the currently open menu. If the current item in focus is the mobile menu toggle button, then we set the toggle button as the target button. However, if the current item in focus is a button element with its own submenu, we check to see if the submenu is currently expanded. If it is, the target button is set to the current button element. If the submenu is not expanded, we set the target button to the next parent button up the menu's hierarchy. Once we have determined the target button, we check to see if the button we're targeting has a currently open submenu. If so, we close the submenu, and in all cases, we set the focus back to the target button so users can clearly understand where they are in the menu's tab order. So these are just a few of several common modifications that can be done to improve and enhance accessibility for existing megamenu plugins. However, remember that it is always better to incorporate accessible HTML patterns from the ground up whenever possible.
Well, thank you, Ellie, so much for sharing all of that. If you guys are looking for assistance in reviewing your site's menu or a detailed accessibility review from a team that's well versed in Section 508 and WCAG, then you can learn more about our audits that we offer at aten.io/accessibility. We would be more than happy to chat with you about any support or questions that your team might need.